The pie sat on my lap, still warm. Pumpkin, the same recipe I'd made every Thanksgiving since 1998. Same glass dish, same careful lattice crust. I even carved little leaf shapes on top, like my daughter used to do when she was little. I parked across the street from my sister-in-law's house, waiting for my husband to text, "Come in." That text never came. I saw shadows through the dining room window, heard laughter when someone opened the door to grab more chairs. A boy ran across the front yard. My nephew, holding a paper turkey in one hand. His mom, Emily, my sister-in-law, stepped out behind him and looked straight past me. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just closed the door again. I waited 20 more minutes. When I finally called my husband, it went straight to voicemail. Then I called again. Then again. Eventually, a text came. 6 words. "Let's talk tonight. Not here." My hands were shaking. I looked down at the pie. I didn't cry, not yet. I started the engine and drove home with the pie untouched. When I got back, I didn't go inside. I sat in the car and watched the steam leave the glass. My phone lit up again. A photo from my niece. Everyone was around the table. My chair, the one I always sat in by the window, was empty. Someone else, probably Emily's cousin, had taken my place. The caption read, "Family." I think that's when it hit me. I wasn't part of their family anymore. Maybe I never really was. And when my husband finally walked through our front door that night, the air still full of cinnamon and silence, he said it plainly. "I told them we're divorcing." He didn't say, "I told you." He had planned it. With them, I was just the last to know. I stood in the kitchen, my hands resting on the pie dish. It was still warm underneath. All I could whisper was, "I wasn't even invited." He looked down. Maybe sorry, maybe not. Emily thought it would be easier. Easier. For whom? That night, I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just placed the pie in the freezer, still whole. I couldn't throw it away. Not yet. Because in that pie was something I hadn't been ready to say out loud. If they didn't want my seat at the table, then maybe it was time I built one of my own. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen staring at my phone like it might apologize. The unanswered text, the ignored call, they all just sat there like stains I couldn't scrub off the screen. It was still early, around 7:30. The house was quiet. My husband, Mark, hadn't come to bed the night before. He'd slept on the couch, or pretended to. The throw blanket was still folded. No indentation on the cushion. Just the faint smell of his cologne in the air. I opened the fridge and saw the pie on the second shelf, tucked between a half-used butter stick and the leftover meatloaf. I closed it quickly, like it burned my eyes. I hadn't asked him anything yet. I didn't want to give him the power to lie. Instead, I did what I always did when things didn't make sense. I checked the calendar. It was still set to November, 1 week past Thanksgiving. I scrolled back. Nothing. Then forward. That's when I saw it. A family group event scheduled 3 days ago. Title, Annual Family Dinner, Emily's Place. Participants, everyone but me. No one had even bothered to hide it. My fingers froze on the screen. I tapped on the list. My daughter's name, my son-in-law's, even Mark's elderly aunt from Minnesota, who hadn't left her house in 4 years, and yet know me. I heard Mark's footsteps behind me before he said anything. "You're up early," he said, voice casual. "Want coffee?" I didn't turn around. Did I do something? He paused. I heard the mug hit the counter gently. "What do you mean?" I turned then, held the phone up. "You had dinner, with everyone, and no one invited me. Was there a reason?" He exhaled, too quickly. "Oh, that. I thought we talked about it." "No, you talked around it. I want the real version." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking smaller. Emily thought it might be too tense. after everything. She didn't want you to feel. She didn't want me to feel? Or she didn't want to deal with me feeling? My voice cracked. There's a difference. She just thought it was better this way. There it was again. Better. I swallowed hard. You knew and said nothing? He didn't answer. The silence that followed was thick. My heart thudded in the space between us. I baked that pie for your family, I whispered. Our family. He didn't meet my eyes. I know. I stepped back. Number. You don't. Because if he had known, really known, he wouldn't have let me sit in a cold car with hope in my hands and humiliation waiting on the other side of the windshield. And that's when I realised this wasn't just about Emily's dinner. This was the beginning of something I hadn't wanted to see. By noon, I was folding laundry I didn't care about. Mark had left. No goodbye, just the sound of the garage door closing and a shadow moving past the front window. I watched him pause in the driveway. He looked like he might come back inside, say something, anything. But then he got in the car and backed out like it was any other Tuesday. I tossed a pair of socks into the drawer harder than I meant to. I don't know why I started cleaning. Maybe because mess made more sense than silence. I vacuumed under the couch, wiped down the windows, even polished the handles on the fridge, all while pretending I wasn't waiting for a call, a knock, a voice to say this wasn't real. It was around 2 when Mrs. Langston, my neighbour, waved from across the lawn. Didn't see you at the dinner, she chirped. Emily had that butternut squash thing you always bring, but she said you were under the weather. My stomach flipped. Is that what she said? She nodded, cheerful. Hope you're feeling better. The girls missed you. Your niece made a cute little place card for you, had it right on the table. I smiled. It felt like someone else's mouth. Thanks, I said, then stepped back inside and locked the door behind me. So they had a place for me, a literal seat. And still, I hadn't been welcome. I walked to the kitchen and opened the freezer. The pie was there, front and centre. Mark hadn't touched it. No one had. I stared at it for a long time. In that moment, it felt like I had frozen part of myself with it. Some sliver of warmth I didn't know how to thaw. Then I remembered something Emily once told me a few years ago during a spring cookout. We're all just satellites in each other's orbit. You and I, we're not exactly centre. I'd laughed then, not realising she was drawing lines even back then. I sat down at the table and pulled out my planner. I flipped to December. Every year, I helped coordinate our holiday gift exchange. I had everyone's preferences written in the margins. No candles for Aunt Em. Cousin prefers red wine. Don't forget, Emily hates perfume. I had managed it all with care. I stared at the names. Then I slowly started to cross them out, one by one, not in anger, in resignation, because I realised I had been managing my place in this family like a job, like I had to earn it. And maybe they had already fired me, and I was the last to find out. I closed the book. The house was so quiet I could hear the wind press against the windows, a soft pressure, asking to be let in. It was Nora who told me, my niece, Emily's daughter, 8 years old, with skinned knees and a whispery voice that always made you lean in to hear the good parts. She came by with her father to drop off a baking dish Emily had borrowed months ago and never returned. Is your mum here? I asked, opening the door. He shook his head, looking mildly uncomfortable. Just swinging by? I nodded. Thanks. Before he turned to go, Nora tugged his hand. Can I give her the card? He sighed, then nodded. Quickly, okay? She walked up to me shyly, holding out a small piece of glittery construction paper. It had a crooked heart and a hand-drawn pie in the corner. Mum said not to, she mumbled, eyes down. What, honey? I bent to her level. She peeked up at me, her voice almost inaudible. Uncle Mark said he was going to tell everyone about the divorce at dinner. That's why Mummy said you shouldn't come. She said it'd make it messy. Time stopped. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. Just a slow pulse in my ears and the sound of leaves scratching across the porch behind her. I knelt down, trying to hold on to her words gently, like they might break if I reacted too hard. She said that, I asked. Nora nodded, then leaned in. But I made you a place card anyway. My throat tightened. You did? She pulled something from her coat pocket, a folded piece of paper stained with cocoa and flattened glitter. It read, Auntie Claire. The I dotted with a heart. I saved it, she whispered. I didn't know what to say, so I just pulled her into a hug, as if I could wrap myself around the part of this family that still remembered me without instructions. Her dad cleared his throat from the steps. Nora! She stepped back, eyes wide. Thank you for telling me, I said softly. She gave a tiny nod and ran back down the walkway. As the car pulled away, I stood on the porch, card in hand, staring at the little heart-shaped dot over the I. Something so small, so careful, so deliberate. It was the kind of detail someone adds when they still believe you matter. I went back inside, set the card on the counter, sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call Mark. I just sat there, hands folded, watching the light shift across the kitchen tiles as afternoon became evening, and everything I thought I knew about my place in that family slowly rewrote itself, in silence. When Mark got home that evening, the house smelled like nothing. No dinner, no music, just quiet. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door like he always did. Same routine, different reality. I waited until he set down his bag and took off his shoes, pretending this was normal. Then I spoke. Nora came by. He froze, not with fear, with that same careful stillness he used when navigating black ice. Oh, he said too lightly. She made me a place card. Said she saved it for me. His eyes flicked toward the counter. The card was there, right next to the untouched pie. He didn't move. She also said you were going to announce the divorce at dinner. Silence. I took a step closer. My voice didn't rise, but it thinned. You planned to tell them before you told me? Mark's jaw tensed. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Then what was it supposed to be, Mark? A public unveiling, a celebration toast between the cranberry sauce and dessert? He shook his head. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like, I pressed. Explain it to me like I'm not just some household object you forgot to take with you. His lips parted, but no words came. That hurt worse than any confession. I pointed to the pie. That was for your family. He glanced at it, then back at me. I stepped closer. I sat in the car for 40 minutes. I saw your sister look right through me. I saw you raise a glass at the window. And then Nora, 8 years old, had to be the one to tell me what my husband was too much of a coward to say. His face twisted, wounded. Don't do that. Do what? I said, voice low. Call it what it is. He finally looked me in the eye. She asked me not to tell you. Emily said you'd complicate things. Complicate what? My own divorce? He looked away, and there it was. Not rage, not even sadness, just that dead, dull disappointment that settles in when you stop expecting better from someone. You always let her make the rules, I said quietly. She just wanted peace, he murmured. No, she wanted control, and you gave it to her. Over us. His shoulders sank. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you didn't mean not to, either. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, head in hands. I didn't sit. I stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching the man I'd spent 23 years beside shrink into someone I barely recognized. And somewhere deep in the silence that followed, I knew. The version of us that had pie and place cards and promises, it had already ended. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the little card Nora had drawn. The Auntie Claire was now smudged from my thumb. I hadn't even realised I'd been holding it in my sleep. Mark had already left again. I didn't ask where. The house felt hollow. I could hear the old furnace humming like a sigh from under the floorboards. Even the birds outside seemed quieter, as if the whole world had agreed to leave me alone. Then the phone rang. I let it buzz twice before answering, not recognising the number. "Hello?" "Claire." The voice was cautious, familiar. "It's Julie. From church. I hope it's not a bad time." Julie. We hadn't spoken in months, not since her move across state lines. She used to sit beside me during service, always keeping peppermint in her purse and always knowing when to offer one. "Julie." "Hi," I said, surprised. I saw the photo Emily posted. Looked like the whole family was there, except..." She trailed off. I let the silence finish the sentence for her. "I wanted to say," she continued gently, "that I missed seeing you, and I was wondering if maybe you'd like a visit." My hand instinctively went to my chest. "A visit? I could come by this weekend. I know how holidays can be, and I still owe you a slice of your famous pumpkin pie." The lump in my throat swelled so fast I had to look up, blinking hard at the ceiling to hold it back. "I'd like that," I said quietly. "Good," she replied. "I'll bring peppermint tea. You still take honey, not sugar, right?" I smiled. "The first real one in days," you remembered. Of course I did. Some things matter enough to remember. We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing dramatic, just soft laughter and check-ins. It wasn't the length of the call that mattered. It was the sound of being seen again. Not as someone's wife or someone's inconvenience, but just Claire. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, phone still in hand, letting the echo of kindness fill the space Mark had left. I walked over to the freezer, opened it. The pie was still there, untouched, but I didn't pull it out, not yet. Instead, I pulled down a teacup. The chipped one with blue ivy around the rim. Julie had given it to me years ago. I washed it, filled it with warm water, and placed it gently on the table. Just setting it there felt like a soft rebellion against the silence I'd been swallowing, because maybe the first step to healing wasn't talking to Mark, or confronting Emily, or even thawing the pie. Maybe it was letting one good voice back in. I didn't expect that one conversation would change anything, but after Julie's call, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in weeks. I opened the hallway closet. Behind the winter coats, buried under a stack of photo albums and donation boxes, was an old storage bin. I pulled it out, sat on the floor, and opened the lid like I was exhaling something that had been stuck in my chest. Inside, years of things I thought I might someday need, or couldn't bring myself to throw away. Mark's anniversary cards, our daughter's old school projects, my church event name tags, still pinned with fading ink, and near the bottom, the guest list I used to print every Thanksgiving, laminated, colour-coded, annotated with smiley faces and stars next to everyone's name. I used to put a heart next to Emily's name. Every year, even when she didn't say thank you, even when she brought her own cranberry sauce and acted like mine was too tart, I stared at that list a long time. Then, slowly, I tore it in half. Not in anger, not in drama, just quietly. Some things didn't need to be saved anymore. I stood and went into the guest bedroom, the one I used to keep for out-of-town family. I opened the drawer and pulled out a blank journal I'd bought on impulse months ago. The cover was linen, soft grey with no title. I sat at the desk and opened to the first page. And for the first time in a long time, I wrote something just for me. December 3rd. I have been erased from other people's plans, but I am still here, still breathing, still holding a teacup in both hands like it might keep me warm from the inside out. I am tired of asking for space at tables where I was only ever tolerated. I will build my own. Small, maybe, but mine. I paused, then underlined the word mine. The air in the room shifted, not warmer, not colder, just clearer. I heard the clock ticking on the wall. Each second felt like a little nudge forward. I closed the journal and looked around the room. No one else had ever read this space like a place of retreat. It had always been for guests. But I could make it mine now. Later that night, I folded the guest towels and placed them in the hallway closet. Not because I was expecting anyone, but because I wasn't anymore. 2 days later, I got a message from Elise, Mark's cousin from Chicago. We weren't especially close, but over the years we'd exchanged recipes, swapped birthday cards, and once shared a long talk at a family reunion about how hard it is to stay gracious when the people around you assume you're fine. Her message was simple. Heard what happened. You were missed. That was all it said. But something in it made my chest ache. I typed back, "Thank you. That means more than I expected." A few minutes later, she called. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, her voice low and steady, but the silence felt worse. "I get that," I said softly. She sighed. "Emily told everyone you had a conflict, said it wasn't a big deal. But the second I saw your chair empty, I knew something wasn't right." I didn't answer. "I kept waiting for you to walk in with that pumpkin pie," she added, chuckling sadly. "It always arrives warm, like it knows it's important." I let out a breath I hadn't realised I'd been holding. "It's in the freezer," I said, still untouched. "Can I say something?" she asked. "Of course." I think Emily's been rewriting the story for a while now. Who matters, who doesn't, who gets called family, and who gets footnoted. That hit hard. "I guess I was a footnote," I said. "No," she replied firmly. "You were the index. You held it together. You were the one who remembered birthdays and brought food and smoothed things over when someone got too loud. You were the kind of glue people forget is holding the whole thing upright." I looked out the window. A breeze lifted the edges of the porch wreath I hadn't taken down yet. It fluttered, quiet, but certain. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "It's not just words," Elise said. "If you ever want to come to Chicago for a real dinner, no drama, no conflicts. My door's open. And I'll make that weird cranberry side dish you like." I laughed, the sound catching me off guard. "You remember that?" "Of course. Some things matter enough to remember." The call ended gently, like a warm hand being laid on mine across a long table. Afterward, I walked to the kitchen and wrote down Elise's name in my new journal. Just her name. No notes. No labels. Then I added 3 words underneath it. Still family. Still. Because sometimes family isn't the people who claim you when it's easy. Sometimes it's the ones who speak up when it's not. That afternoon, I stepped outside to check the mail and found a plain brown paper bag sitting on the front porch bench. No note. No message. Inside, carefully wrapped in a dish towel, was my pie dish. Clean, washed, dry. I stood there holding it for a long moment, the weight familiar, but suddenly foreign. Like a gift returned after its meaning had been drained. The pie had been my way of arriving at every family event before I ever opened my mouth. It said, "I'm trying." It said, "I belong." And now it had come back. Quietly, like an apology no one wanted to speak aloud. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Then I sat. I traced the edge of the dish with my finger, following the small chip at the rim, the same one from a decade ago when Mark had dropped it washing up after Thanksgiving. He'd promised to replace it. I'd said not to bother. The chip gave it character. Now, it just made it feel incomplete. I got up and walked to the freezer, opened it. The pie was still there. I pulled it out and set it next to the dish, the two pieces of a ritual that no longer had a place to live. I thought about throwing the pie away, about placing the dish in a donation box. Instead, I found myself reaching for the Sharpie in the junk drawer. On the bottom of the dish, in neat block letters, I wrote, "Mine. 1998 முதல் 2023 வரை, not because I was saying goodbye to the pie, but because I was acknowledging the years I'd poured into other people's tables, the warmth I'd tried to bake into places where I was never truly fed." Then I wrapped the pie carefully and slid it into the refrigerator to thaw, not for the family, for me. I pulled out a plate and set the dish on top of it, a quiet act of reclamation. I didn't need someone else to serve me anymore. The front door opened just then. Mark had returned to grab something from the garage. He stepped in, paused when he saw the dish on the table. "You found it," he said. "No," I replied. "It was left." He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I looked down at the words on the dish. Mine. It didn't mean selfish. It meant enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something entirely new. The next morning, I made myself a slice of the pie. Just one. I ate it slowly, standing at the kitchen counter in my robe, the fork scraping gently against the glass dish. It wasn't just good, it was familiar, like muscle memory for the heart. I had barely rinsed the plate when my phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from a group message. Holiday planning thread. Emily's house. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that thread in over a year. At some point, they must have quietly created a new one without me. I thought they'd stopped using it altogether. But here it was, resurrected, active. I tapped it, there in full colour, a thread of texts organising Christmas Eve dinner. "Emily, let's keep it small, just us siblings plus kids. No extra drama this year, please." Mark's response was a simple thumbs up. My name was never mentioned. Neither was my absence. The language stung more than if they'd said it outright. No extra drama, no me. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. I wasn't sure which emotion hit first. Anger, sadness, something colder, the kind of cold that comes from being scrubbed out of your own narrative. I scrolled up and saw an earlier message I hadn't noticed, from 2 days ago. "Mark, I'll drop Claire's pie dish back. Thanks for washing it." So it had been deliberate, a transaction, handled, passed back, signed off, as if I were a borrowed object being returned with thanks. I set the phone down carefully. No slamming, no dramatic toss, just quiet. And then I did something I hadn't done since the night Nora handed me that little place card. I took out my planner, flipped to the week of December 24th, and in ink I wrote, "Dinner. 6 p.m. My house. No guest list. No menu. Just a time, a place, and a claim." I didn't know who'd come. Maybe no one. But for once, I wasn't writing it for them. The buzz of another message came through, more cheerful planning, more laugh emojis. I turned the phone over. Outside, the wind was picking up. Bits of early December leaves blew across the porch, catching in the wreath that had half fallen from its hook. I stepped outside, removed it, and placed it in the trash. Not because I didn't love the season, but because that wreath, like so many things, had been hanging there out of habit, and I wasn't living on habit anymore. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It didn't list grievances or name names. It simply stated what needed to be said. I sat at the desk in the guest room, now mine. and wrote it with a blue pen, the same one I'd used for holiday cards all those years. I chose each word the way I now chose my piece, carefully, but with no apology. To Emily and Mark, I received the messages. I understand I'm no longer included in family gatherings. That decision is yours, but I won't pretend I was never here. I won't act like my years of presence, effort, and care didn't count. I know what I brought, and I know when it was dismissed. I'll be hosting dinner at my home on the 24th. No pressure, no expectations, just a table, one where people are welcome to arrive as they are. If that's something you value, you're welcome. If not, I wish you peace. Claire, I folded the letter and slipped it into 2 envelopes. One addressed to Emily, one to Mark. Not texts, not emails. Something with weight. Something that couldn't be swiped away. I walked them down to the mailbox myself. No ceremony, no hesitation, just the sound of the flap closing and the solid thud as they dropped in. Later, I made tea, not the usual peppermint, chamomile this time, and I sat in my kitchen, alone, but not lonely, and sipped it slowly, watching light stretch across the tiles. That evening, Mark came by. He wasn't expecting to see the letter yet. Mail hadn't been delivered, but I left his copy in the hallway on the bench with his spare gloves. He picked it up and looked at me. "You could have just called," he said. I met his eyes. I didn't want to be talked out of it. He didn't argue. After a long pause, he nodded, almost respectfully. "I see." And for once, I think he really did. Because this wasn't about keeping a seat at Emily's table. It was about building mine. That night, I wrote a second list. Not names, not recipes, just words. Warm, honest, safe, mine. And I underlined the last one twice. Because this quiet, deliberate standing, it wasn't about reclaiming what had been taken. It was about no longer asking permission to exist in rooms I had helped decorate. And if the only person who sat at my table on Christmas Eve was me, then so be it. At least I'd be sitting in truth. 2 days before Christmas Eve, an envelope arrived on my doorstep. No return address, just my name, written in neat, angular handwriting I'd recognise anywhere, Emily. I brought it inside, laid it on the counter next to the journal, and stared at it for a long while. Part of me didn't want to open it, but the larger part, the one that had been waiting for years to be seen fully, did. The note inside wasn't handwritten. It was typed, clean, controlled, like she'd edited it a dozen times. "Claire, I received your invitation. I won't be attending. I know this probably doesn't come as a surprise. I want you to know. None of this was ever personal. I just needed peace. Growing up, holidays were war zones for me. Loud, chaotic, unpredictable. I've spent my entire adult life trying to keep things quiet, orderly, simple. You bring emotion into every room. Not in a bad way, just in a way that unsettles me. I needed to create a version of family that didn't require navigating other people's emotional landscapes. I hope, sincerely, that you find the version that works for you. Emily." I read it twice. Then once more. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification, from her lens. And for the first time, I didn't reject it out of hand. Emily hadn't been cruel. She'd been cautious. And in her quest to build a still life out of a living family, she'd erased the parts that moved too loudly, parts like me. That didn't excuse it, but it explained it. Still, my fingers tightened around the edge of the page as I read her final line again. "You bring emotion into every room." Once, that would have made me shrink. Now, I saw it differently. Emotion wasn't mess. It was truth showing up uninvited. And sometimes that was the only kind of truth that mattered. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my journal, not to keep it close, but to remind myself. People tell you who they are when they stop pretending to protect you. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the small, handwritten note I'd left by the oven. Dinner, 6 p.m. sharp. Just 2 days away. The countdown had begun, not to confrontation, not even reconciliation, but to something I'd never allowed myself before, a holiday without apology. I lit a candle on the windowsill, the kind that flickers with that soft golden edge, not flashy, just real. And for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading December 24th. I was preparing for it, one breath, one pie crust, one unshakable truth at a time. I was folding napkins for the dinner table when the phrase came back to me. It slipped in like a draft under a closed door. Soft, uninvited, but undeniable. Some people just don't belong anymore. Emily had said it once, not directly to me. It was at a gathering, years ago. She was talking about Mark's cousin who'd missed 3 Thanksgivings in a row. I'd laughed then, politely, and moved the conversation forward, not realising that her words had a longer shelf life than her cranberry sauce. But now, 2 nights before Christmas Eve, the phrase landed differently, because I could feel its weight, its implication, its echo. I walked to the journal on my side table and flipped it open. I found the page where I'd written, "I am still here." Then, below it, I added, "Belonging is not a permission, it's a truth." The table was already half set. No fine china, just the dishes I liked, the ones with the faded blue trim and tiny hairline cracks that only revealed themselves in sunlight. I wasn't expecting anyone, not officially, but something in me said, prepare like they're coming. That afternoon, I got a text from Mark. "I saw the letter. Dinner still at 6? I stared at it. He hadn't RSVP'd. He hadn't apologised, but the message felt open. I replied, "Yes. Doors open at 5:30. Nothing else. An hour later, another message came, from Nora. "Can I still bring your card?" I smiled. Not a wide smile, but the kind that pulls from deep down. I replied, "Only if you read it this time." And then, as I stood by the hallway mirror, brushing my hair back, smoothing my blouse, I heard my own voice echo in my mind. Not from Emily, not from Mark, but from myself. From years ago, a moment when I had comforted a younger cousin crying in the coach room after a family fight. I had told her, "You always belong here, even when it doesn't feel like it." I whispered it now, quietly, into the room. Not to someone else this time. To me, "You always belong here, even when it doesn't feel like it." I said it again. This time, I believed it. The napkins were folded. The pie was thawed. The house didn't feel full. Not yet. But it felt ready. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing we can be. The clock read 5:29 when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell, a knock. 2 gentle taps, the kind that ask permission rather than assume it. I opened the door, and there he was. Mark. He held a bottle of wine awkwardly, like it had been handed to him in the driveway. "Red," he said. "The kind you like with pie." I stepped aside, nodded him in. The house smelled of cinnamon and rosemary. I'd lit 2 candles, not because I expected guests, but because I wanted to feel like someone had arrived. He stood just inside the threshold for a moment, taking it in. "This feels like before," he said. I tilted my head. "Before what?" He didn't answer right away. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea. He poured silence. Finally, I spoke. "You could have told me." "I know." "You could have stopped her. Emily. The dinner. The silence." He stared at the teacup in front of him. "I didn't want to be in the middle." "You were never in the middle, Mark. You were beside me. Until you weren't." He winced, barely, just a tightening around his jaw. I told myself it was easier not to rock the boat. He murmured. And what am I? I asked. The storm. He looked up then. Number, you were the only one rowing. That hit deeper than I expected. I folded my hands, let the silence stretch. You know, I said softly, Emily told me I bring too much emotion into the room. She said that? I nodded. In her letter. It wasn't cruel. It was her truth. He stared at the tea again, then quietly said, I used to think that emotion was what made this house feel alive. I didn't reply. After a beat, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something folded. The original group dinner plan. I recognized it immediately. I had used to be the one who made those templates. My name had been erased, but in faint pencil, barely visible, someone had written Claire. In the corner, my breath caught. You wrote that, I whispered. He nodded. I thought maybe you'd come, even if Emily didn't want it. You could have said something. I should have. There was nothing left to argue. We had each made our silence, and now we were sitting in the quiet it built. He stood to leave, the wine untouched. At the door, he paused. Are you sure you want to do dinner alone? I looked around the room. Soft light, folded napkins, flickering candles. No, I said gently, but I'd rather do it alone than feel invisible at someone else's. He nodded once, and then he left. After Mark left, I didn't clean up right away. The tea sat cold in the cups. The folded napkins remained untouched, each one still resting in its ring like a held breath. It was nearly dark when I finally rose to turn off the porch light. That's when I saw it, a slip of paper, left tucked under the bottle of wine. I hadn't noticed it before. I picked it up, unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a copy of last year's seating chart, one I had printed, my handwriting, my notes, and there, in the top right corner, scribbled in blue ink, was a line I hadn't seen in over a year. Claire always goes by the window. She likes the light. I had written that for Emily, to help her remember. But this copy was different. At the bottom, in Mark's blockier writing, there was one added note. Move chair closer to her this time. I sat down slowly, holding the paper. He had saved it. Amid all the edits and erasures, amid all the passivity and silence, he had, in some way, tried to stay close. Tried, and failed. But tried. A beat passed. Then I reached for my journal and wrote. Sometimes regret doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes in the form of something not thrown away. I looked around the room, not with sadness this time, but with a quiet kind of reverence. This house, this table, this silence, it had been mine long before anyone else claimed it. And now it could be mine again, fully, honestly. I placed the wine on the counter, the paper in the drawer. Then I walked to the bookshelf in the hall and pulled down a photo frame I hadn't looked at in months. A picture of Mark and me, taken 10 years ago, Thanksgiving Day. We were both laughing. I had just dropped the pie, the same pie dish, chipped and warm. I didn't throw the photo away, but I placed it behind a row of books, not to forget, just to shift it further from view. Some memories don't need to be erased. They just need to be re-shelved. Outside, the December wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like an old friend unsure of its welcome. I lit one more candle, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered, not by anyone else, but by myself. Christmas Eve morning was quiet, not heavy, not hollow, just still. I opened the curtains early, let the winter sun pour across the floorboards like permission. I brewed coffee, stronger than usual, no reason to dilute the day. As I moved through the house, I noticed something new. Nothing had changed, really. The furniture was the same, the walls the same pale green, but it all felt realigned, like someone had finally drawn a line around the shape of my own life and said, "Here, this is yours." I opened the fridge and pulled out the pie. It had thawed beautifully. The crust looked just the way it always had when I was most proud of it, a little golden, a little imperfect, deeply mine. I set the oven to warm and placed the pie on the counter. Then I reached for my journal. December 24th. I am not angry anymore. I am no longer asking for a seat. I am setting the table. I underlined the last line twice. The doorbell didn't ring. There were no RSVP texts. Still, I moved quietly around the dining room, placing settings as if each chair deserved the dignity of being ready. A knock finally came just after 5. It was Nora. She stood there in a wool coat too big for her, probably hand-me-down, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand and a tiny plastic poinsettia in the other. "Hi," she said, unsure. I smiled. "Hi, sweet girl." She held out the card. "Mum doesn't know I'm here," she whispered. I bent down. "Do you want her to?" She shrugged. "She said it wasn't my place." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not defiance, but choice. "It is," I said gently. "It's always your place to be kind." She stepped inside. I didn't press her, I just handed her a warm mug of cider and let her walk the space in silence. She paused at the table. "You put out napkins." "Old habit. Is it okay if I make a place card?" Tears pressed behind my eyes, but I smiled. "Of course." She sat and scribbled carefully on a small piece of notepad paper, then placed it at the seat by the window. It said, "Claire." No heart over the I this time, just simple, solid lettering, and that was enough. I didn't know if anyone else would come, but in that moment, I realised something. The dinner had already begun. Not the meal, the meaning. And I wasn't waiting anymore. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still, not silent like grief, but still like rest. Nora had fallen asleep on the couch, curled beneath the same quilt my mother had sewn when I got married. I didn't move her, just placed another throw over her legs and watched her breathe for a moment. The table was exactly as we'd left it. 2 plates, a half-eaten pie, a pot of tea gone cold. 1 fork lay on the floor. I smiled, picked it up, and set it in the sink. I didn't rush to clean. There was something holy about the quiet, like the house had exhaled. Outside, the world was slowly coming back to life. Across the street, Mr. Hargrove was collecting his paper in a red flannel robe. Farther down, someone was walking a dog, Christmas sweater and all. From another window, I heard faint laughter, the tail end of a family joke, perhaps, or maybe the start of a new one. And it didn't ache the way I thought it might. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to belong to a moment outside my walls. I belonged inside them. I walked past the hallway mirror and paused. My reflection surprised me, not younger, not lighter, but clearer. Hair pulled back in a soft bun, eyes tired but alert, and behind me, the living room, quiet and unassuming, finally feeling like mine. I walked into the kitchen and poured the last cup of tea from the pot. It was bitter now, but I drank it anyway. Then I pulled my coat on and stepped out onto the porch. The wreath I had thrown away hadn't been taken by the trash collectors yet. It sat in the bin, half crushed. For a moment, I reached toward it, then stopped. Instead, I looked down the street. The neighbourhood was waking up. One house at a time, car doors closing, porch lights switching off, life rolling forward. No one noticed me watching, and that too felt right. I thought of the dinner, the quiet laughter between me and Nora, the way she'd asked to keep her seat card, said she wanted to show it to her teacher. I thought of Julie, who'd left a voicemail late last night. Just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Call me when you can. And Elise, who had sent a photo of her own pie with a message, yours is prettier, but mine came with peace. I thought of the echo in my own voice when I'd said grace, not for others, not out loud, just a small blessing whispered for myself. Let this be the beginning. And it was. Nora stirred around 8:15. She blinked against the morning light streaming through the curtains, then sat up slowly, still wrapped in the quilt. Did I miss breakfast? She mumbled. I smiled from the kitchen. You missed cereal. I'm making eggs. She padded in barefoot, rubbing her eyes. I dreamed there were 10 people at dinner. I chuckled. That's ambitious. Yeah, but it was nice. We ate at the small table by the window, the one I used for writing letters. It wasn't set for guests anymore, just 2 mismatched plates, 1 chipped mug, and a butter knife that had seen better days. And yet, it felt full. She glanced up at the bookshelf and noticed the photo tucked behind the row of novels, the one of Mark and me, the one I had partially hidden. Is that you and Uncle Mark? I nodded. Did you love him a lot? I hesitated, then answered honestly. Yes, I did. For a long time. She didn't ask what changed. Children don't always need the middle part explained. They just want to know if you made it through. She picked up her juice and said softly, Mum says families are supposed to be neat, like puzzles. I looked at her gently. And what do you think? She tilted her head. I think some of the best ones are messy, but they still fit. I swallowed hard. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her place card from the night before, folded, slightly crinkled, but whole. I want to make these for everyone next year, she said, like you used to. I blinked fast. You remember that? She shrugged. You always made it feel like everyone was part of it, even me. The weight of that landed gently, not like a blow, but like truth settling into the room. I thought about something I'd written weeks ago in my journal. I don't know if I've mattered, but I've tried to make people feel seen. And here she was, seeing me, echoing it back without even realizing. Legacy doesn't always come in property or tradition. Sometimes it's a folded piece of paper held in a child's coat pocket. I stood and walked to my writing desk, tore a small page from the back of my journal, wrote 1 sentence in clean cursive. The table feels warmer when everyone's name is spoken. Then handed it to her. She read it, nodded, and tucked it beside her card. You should write a book, she said. Maybe one day, I replied. But even if I never did, this moment, this tiny mirror held up to my life, would have been more than enough. That evening, just before dusk, I took a walk. Nora had been picked up by her father an hour earlier. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Save me a piece next year." I promised I would. The air was crisp, the kind of December chill that bites only after the sun starts slipping behind the trees. I pulled my coat tighter and found myself walking without thinking, feet following a memory. Soon, I stood across from Emily's house. It looked exactly as it had the night of the dinner. Porch light glowing, wreath perfectly centred on the door, 2 cars in the driveway, a flicker of television light dancing through the living room window. I didn't plan to stop, but I did. Just for a minute. That's when I saw her, Emily, standing at the window. She didn't move, didn't wave, just stood with her hand resting on the frame, her face caught between the reflection of the glass and the shadows of the room behind her. She looked tired, not angry, not triumphant, just still. And suddenly I remembered the hook, the first night, when I had stood across the street holding that pie, hoping someone would open the door, hoping to be let in. But this time was different. I wasn't waiting, I wasn't asking, and she wasn't guarding the room anymore. She was watching it happen without her. There was no family laughter, no second round of dessert, just a room full of order and a woman standing alone inside it. She saw me. For just a breath, her eyes met mine. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away, and neither did I. I slowly reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the card Nora had made the year before, the one with the crooked heart. I held it for just a second in my gloved hand, then tucked it gently into my bag again, not to discard, but to carry it forward, because the echo of regret doesn't always sound like "I'm sorry." Sometimes it's just the absence of noise, the stillness where chaos used to be, the stare of someone who thought silence would keep her safe, now realizing it only kept her alone. I turned, walked home, no door slammed, no tears fell. The sky behind me dimmed into that soft navy blue where the first star begins to peek through, and in that quiet, I whispered what I once begged to hear. I belonged, even when you didn't see me. Then I lit the porch light, not for guests, just to remind myself, this house is mine. The next morning was colder than the day before, the kind of cold that glazes windows and keeps coffee pots working overtime. I woke early, before the sun, and lit a single candle in the kitchen, not for decoration, just warmth. The pie dish sat in the sink, washed and drying upside down on a towel. The words I had written on the bottom weeks ago, still visible in sharp ink. Mine. 1998 മുതൽ 2023 വരെ, I ran my thumb over it once, then gently placed it back on the shelf. Not to forget it, but to rest it. I made 1 cup of tea, poured it into the chipped mug with the blue ivy, and sat at the small writing table by the window. There, beside my journal, was a stack of recipe cards. I had pulled them out the night before, but hadn't touched them. Until now. I took one and began to write. Not just a recipe, a message for whoever sits at your table. May they feel seen. May they be welcome. May they never wonder if they were supposed to be there. I didn't sign my full name. Just Claire. I tucked it into an empty pie box I had saved in the pantry. White cardboard, a little dented on one side, but clean. Then I slipped on my coat, stepped outside, and walked 4 blocks to the community pantry near the church. The sun was just starting to rise, soft gold pushing back the dark. A man was unloading cans from his trunk. A woman beside him was placing scarves on the coat rack. I set the pie box gently on the shelf labelled "Holiday Leftovers. Share with love." It looked small there, but it was everything. As I turned to go, the woman smiled at me. "That yours?" she asked, gesturing to the box. I nodded. "Looks like it's full of something important." I smiled. "It is." I walked home slowly, the morning warming by degrees. When I stepped back inside, I didn't feel lonely. I felt located, centered in a life that no longer needed someone else's permission. And as I folded the last place card into my journal, Nora's, the one with my name on it, I whispered a blessing not just for the girl who made it, but for the woman who had finally stopped asking to be invited. "Welcome home," I said to myself, and for the first time it echoed back, "You already are."